All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have 2 minutes past 1. I'm a stickler for time, so let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here today. Just reading those chat boxes, we got a solid mix of some current teachers that teach with PLI, some that don't. We have a mix of elementary teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, from core to electives to languages. That's outstanding. Today's topic: best practices in online instruction. How do we bring the power back to online discussion boards? I'm thrilled to spend the next 60 minutes with all of you. I get to put my teacher hat back on, which is something I don't get to do often anymore. And most importantly, I'm most excited that I use this as an excuse to put on a tie. Because of COVID and working remotely, I have about 50 ties in my closet that are just collecting dust. So thank you for allowing me to kind of feel like I dressed up again. It always makes you feel good when you do that. Some of you teach online, some of you teach face-to-face, some of you might teach blended, where you teach online a couple days a week and you go on campus a couple days a week. What I like about today's topic is it does not matter the modality of the learning environment that you teach in, whether face-to-face, virtual, or blended. Online discussion forums can generate great value for you and your students, regardless of the learning modality that you teach in. And these are the kind of topics that I like because they're applicable across all ecosystems. So that's today's topic. But before we get started, I just want to remind you that each of you on this call matters and that we appreciate you, whether or not you work for PLI or not. One thing that we all have in common as educators is we don't have enough time. We have a lot to do and we don't have enough time to do it. And the fact that you're choosing to spend the next 60 minutes of your time with me and with us today just speaks volumes to your commitment as an educator, your passion as a lifelong learner, and we appreciate that. So thank you for being here. I encourage you for the next 60 minutes to try to stay in the present and focus just on this topic. And I know it's difficult. We're looking ahead to spring break. Excited for that, right? Maybe you have some grading deadlines coming down the pipeline. You have learners that are struggling and you're wondering, how do you reach them? You have extracurricular duties. You're a coach, you do clubs, you have parent concerns. We totally know you have a lot on your plate. I want to make sure you get out of this the next 60 minutes based on why you attended. So I encourage you to really stay in the present and focus on the power of one. And so one of the things that I always do, whether I attend a conference, I take a class to further my learning, or I attend a webinar like this, I always make it my goal, very simple, to walk away with one. And what I mean by that is one thing that I learned that I didn't previously know, something that sparked my interest that, hey, you know what, that sounds interesting. I want to learn more about that. I'm going to do my own research. Or maybe it's one thing that you want to reflect upon, or maybe it's one action that you can immediately apply to your teaching and learning environment. I encourage all of you today in the next 60 minutes to focus on that one. And when we wrap up, I'm going to bring it back up and I'm going to ask a few of you guys to share in the chat, you know, what is your power of one? What is your one takeaway from this presentation? So warm up. And if you can, if you're by the chat box, I encourage you to kind of, let's get our brains warm and answer this question in the chat box. How might the image on the screen relate to today's topic? Bringing the power back to discussion forums. There's no right or wrong answer. How might that image on the screen relate to today's topic, bringing the power back to discussion forums? For fun, toss in your guesses. No right or wrong answer. Give you about 15, 20 seconds there. I love that, Amanda. Everyone working together for one goal. Solid. Team efforts, working together. Yep, Keely and Christina, great. Most definitely, Lynn, working together and communicating. Give about 5 more seconds. Yes, a lot of team comments, no doubt. And again, no right or wrong answer. Somewhere along the lines, the last 20 years, about 20 years ago, discussion forums started kind of getting introduced to academia. And 20 years ago, it was very, very exciting when a teacher or a college instructor or whomever started leveraging discussion forums in their classrooms. It was exciting because it was novel. But somewhere along the last 20 years, when teachers assign discussion prompts, a lot of students no longer look at it as exciting. They look at it kind of like a chore, where most kids probably don't smile like the ones in this picture as they're doing house chores, right? So what happened? Why do a lot of students in courses today look at online discussion forums as a chore? And that's what we're going to talk about. We want our students to be excited, like the two girls are in the pictures, when they engage with discussion forums. And hopefully when you walk away today, I'm going to give you some tips on that. Also, to set the stage, I'm going to play about a minute clip from, personally, one of my favorite shows, Curb Your Enthusiasm. It talks about something called bad middling. And after the clip, I'm going to tie it into the presentation, and then we'll start rocking and rolling.
That look like wood.
If you get heavy wood.
It's a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, it's a disaster.
It's a disaster. It's a complete disaster. My dinner party done.
Yeah, because Andy and Cassie are in the middle.
That's what it is.
And they can't middle. You have to be able to carry the conversation.
Yes.
You have to be interesting. You're the point guard there. You're distributing the ball.
They can't fucking
They can't middle. Look at
Family
that.
loves fishing now. Andy loves it. I love it. Skylar loves it. I can't believe it. Do you like fishing, Cheryl?
No. Oh, Mike, fishing. Can we save this?
I'll take care of it.
Thank you, Larry.
And it's the bucket of bait, okay? And which is called chum. They call it chum. I don't know why. And she takes it and she puts it onto the hook. She knew what she was doing. She was born to it.
Okay.
She was great.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. This dinner's not going very well.
Sorry.
And the reason it's not going well is because the wrong people are in the middle.
What?
Yeah, you can't handle the middle. You're not a middler.
Andy,
Really?
not everybody has the personality for the middle.
It's very presumptuous of you to even be sitting here.
Freddie happens to be a great middle, I know that. I'd like Freddie and Cassie to switch, and I'd like Andy and Larry.
It's your house, and you want it.
I have told these stories before and got left.
Separated. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Anyway, let me just finish.
All right, so you get the point there. We'll stop there. A lot of you have either hosted or probably attended a dinner party. And one of the jobs of the host is to invite interesting guests so the flow of the conversation is positive and it's entertaining and everyone's having a good time. It's the same thing as the teacher in a course who's facilitating an online discussion forum. Instead of inviting interesting guests, you need to invite interesting discussion prompts, things that are worth talking about. As the host of a dinner party, if it's not going well, you need to intervene yourself to improve, reset expectations, or introduce people to extend those conversations. Same thing in leveraging online discussions. As a host, you need to kind of be the facilitator, monitoring for appropriate behaviors and etiquettes. And if somebody gets out of line, you need to redirect them or prompt people to extend conversations. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
That look like wood.
If you
Some common pitfalls of online discussion forums is it often results in poor student participation and poor student responses. And oftentimes, the reason that students aren't engaged and the responses lack that substance and that deep quality that we want as a teacher is because we fail to create an effective prompt. We often assign too many prompts. So the actual act of engaging in conversation becomes rote, routine, and boring because we're doing one every other day or one every week. Oftentimes we assign things that should be in a discussion forum as a discussion. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then certainly prompts that aren't aligned to outcomes. Or as the teacher, maybe we didn't put as much planning, modeling, or facilitating to get the engagement that we want. So today's presentation is going to take three parts. We're going to talk a little bit about some things that as a teacher you should think about before you actually invite your students to engage in your virtual discussion. The second thing we're going to talk about are once you hit submit and the discussion goes live, what are some things you as a teacher should think about while that discussion is taking place? And then the third is how do you wrap up your online discussions? If we have time, I'll share some closing tips and some other educational technology tools that you can weave into your discussion forums if we get to it. But thank you for attending. And as a result of attending, just so you know, you're going to get a copy of this recording, but you're also going to get a special gift. It's like a 10 or a 12-page guide to facilitating effective discussion forums. And all of you will get that. And that covers everything we're talking about in this presentation. And it goes even to greater detail. So let's do it. What I want you to do right now is if you have a pen and pad next to you, take it out. And if you don't, just think about it, that's fine. But I want you to do two things, and I'm going to give you about 60 seconds. Again, if you have access to a pen or paper or a computer, type it, write it. If not, just think about it. If you were to generate a discussion prompt in any course you teach right now. Some of you said you teach Spanish, you teach French, you teach high school business classes, you're a math teacher. Write down right now a sample discussion prompt that you can deliver to your students right now. That's part one. Part two, write down 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're going to do to make sure that that discussion is successful. So I'm going to give you about a minute. I'm going to set the timer on my phone. I want you to do 2 things. Type it out or think about it in your head or write it on paper. What is an actual discussion prompt that you can give to your class right now? And then 2, what are some action steps you're going to take to make sure that that discussion with that class goes smooth? I'm going to set my timer for 60 seconds. And while you're thinking on that, I'm going to talk over you, because what we're going to do throughout the presentation, later on after I review some tips with you, I'm going to have you go back and reflect over that prompt that you wrote and those steps that you wrote. And I'm going to invite you to kind of share in the chat what you learned and how you might revise your prompt based on the tips and strategies that we're going to share with you. Give you about 20 more seconds. Welcome, Horace. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing that on. All right, so we just spent about a minute and a half thinking about a sample discussion prompt that we can deliver and some steps that you might take to make sure it's successful. So now we're going to kind of unpeel the onion and talk about how to create a effective discussion prompt and those steps. So let's review the purpose of online discussions. They build class community, right? They have the potential, if we do it right, to connect prior and cross-department learning. They personalize the learning experience for students. They strengthen culture, awareness, and empathy. You know, we have to remember our students engage in discussions on things like YouTube, Facebook, and all the other platforms, but they don't necessarily know how to engage in actual healthy dialogue and discourse, and that is a value of a discussion. Discussions provide more wait time. When I was in college, I remember our professors would always harp with us, when you're a teacher, always wait 3 seconds and actually count in your head 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 before you follow up to students. You want that silence so students have time to reflect. The value of a discussion board is they have unlimited time. They can think for an hour or overnight. That's a great value for some of our students that require more processing time. If discussions are set up the right way, they're going to hit all of those 4 C's that all of our standards talk about: creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. It removes peer pressure. You know, think of those students that are afraid to raise their hand in class, the ones that always sit in the back row. It encourages inclusion of all students. You can't hide in an online discussion forum, and you're participating in a non-threatening way because you're not getting called on, where some students are introverted and that makes them uncomfortable. It allows them the safe space and the reflection time to feel comfortable in the learning environment. And if done right, online discussions can create conditions of learning where the sum of all the class contributions are better than the part. And man, how powerful can that be when it opens up your perspective to all the different cultures and the thoughts and the perspectives that everybody in the class has. So what are some tips before we deliver your online discussion? Tip number 1, step number 1 is we need to think about the purpose and the expectations. Why are we asking our students to engage in the discussion? Too often than not, when we teach virtually, we think we just need to put a discussion up there just because it's the virtual environment, and that's what virtual teachers do. We need to first think about why. You know, what is the purpose? What are we trying to have our students accomplish? The second piece is, how are you going to present your directions? And I'm going to show you an example of that here in a second. And then what? So why, how, and what? What are the students actually going to be doing? And are you presenting the information in a way that is bias-free? It's consistent from discussion to discussion. Every time you engage your students in an online discussion forum, you don't want to have them relearn the structure and the expectations. It should be consistent throughout the entire course. An example of that, and I apologize, this maybe isn't the best screen, it might be a little blurry on your end, but this is an example of a course I used to deliver to first-time online teachers. So it's an adult course for adults. But regardless of the discussion prompt, every course, maybe there was 5, 10, a dozen discussions. The look and feel of it was the same. So that every time the students came, they knew the purpose was going to be right at the top, followed by the call to action, the directions, the tips, which we're going to talk about here in a second. That's what we call feed forward. Too often we focus on feedback, which is important, but we don't focus enough on feed forward. How are you equipping your students to be successful on their first attempt? And you can see here, I linked to an example of what I call an exemplar. And so I'm setting that high quality expectations for the learners. This is what, as a teacher, I am looking for. Here's an example. Post and reply dates, and then it's cut off at the bottom, but it's their rubric or their actual prompts. So step one is, again, why. Telling your students, here's why we're learning this. Here's what I hope to have you gain, and then how and the what. Step two, you want to build your feed forward and your feedback banks. Feed forward, we just talked about providing them exemplars, examples of great student work from prior classes, and non-exemplars. So they also understand the opposite of that. The second piece, though, is feedback banks. What is your response plan when a student is doing really well on your discussion forums? What is your response plan when a student is struggling on your discussion forums? And this might be included in the packet that we're providing you. I'm not sure. If it's not, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you an example of the ones that I used to use. But I would have a feedback bank ready to go. Things that I wanted to privately email or reach out to students when they did not model the behaviors I would want them to in a discussion forum. For example, you're always going to have those students that apply late, those students that don't reply at all. The students that reply, a classmate replies, but then they don't reply to the classmate, right? You should have your pre-canned responses ready to go in a positive educational way for those types of scenarios. And then on the opposite side, we need to assume that for many of our students, this is their first exposure to a quality online learning course. And so we need to reinforce in them the behaviors and the actions that lead to a successful virtual learning experience. And so it's important to give them that affirmation. So if you have a student that's doing a really good, they're posting really well, they're consistently posting early, or they're weaving in information from their personal life into the discussion forum, you want to acknowledge that. And so I would always have these banks open in my tabs, and as I would be reading students' discussion prompts, if I wanted to follow up with them individually, I would just copy and paste the canned response. I'd add 1 or 2 customized lines and fire it off to the student. So feed forward and feedback. The next piece that we often forget about is the simple adage, I do, we do, you do. Again, students have not been exposed on how to engage in healthy dialogue, healthy discourse online. So we need to teach them. And so if you haven't integrated discussion forums, or you have, but you haven't modeled the right way that you think you should, it's okay to go back and practice. Model for the students an example that you post of a quality response, then do it together, and then release them to do it on their own. Coach them up. Don't grade them the first couple times. Just give them positive reinforcement and positive feedback. Okay, so the foundation of a good discussion is having something worthwhile to discuss. It all starts with your prompt. If you don't remember anything else from the presentation, perhaps this will be one takeaway. If you come up with a discussion board prompt and you read it, and you're not going to be excited to go back into your learning management system to read the student replies, then your students are probably not going to be excited to also reply to that prompt. You should be excited after you deliver that prompt and look forward to reading those responses. And if you are, then your students probably will be too. Remember, the most important thing is we want to generate questions and situations that can actually be discussed. Think back to that video of Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. We want to target the head, which is the logic, the heart, people's emotions, and the gut, their sense of belonging, who they are, and how they fit in a larger society that is bigger than them. It's kind of like a good speech, right? If you're a good speech writer, if you're a good speech deliverer, you want to target all the emotions in one speech. You want to make people laugh, you want to make people reflect, and maybe you want to get them a little emotional and shed a tear or two. Man, if you can target the head, the heart, and the gut in your discussion forum, you're going to have a solid discussion with the students. So My first tip is we want to make sure when we come up with our prompts that we are avoiding repeat back prompts. I'm a former high school business teacher, so my examples in the presentation are going to be focused on when I taught accounting. But this is an example of an ineffective discussion prompt. What are the main types of internal controls a business uses? That's a factual question. What's going to happen there, it's going to lead to a collection of similar responses. And so by the time the first 2 or 3 students author their response, there's no incentive for the rest of the class to offer the responses because the answers are already in the form. All I have to do is go to Google and I get the answer to this. That's an ineffective discussion prompt. A better way for me to draw out as a teacher the information I want is just a simple switch. It's been reported that a popular electronics store pats down their employees during the busy holiday season when their shift ends. Why do you agree or disagree with that? Wow, that's going to stir debate. Some students are going to say, yeah, this is a good idea. I'm the business owner. I can do what I want. Some are going to say that could be unethical. That could be illegal. It's going to lead to cross-disciplinary topics, maybe lawsuits, infringing employees' rights. It's going to get me to the same purpose that I want here, which is to figure out whether or not the students understand the steps businesses take to protect the things they own. But it's going to go about it in a way that's going to create discourse. So we want to avoid repeat back prompts. This is also an example of like a check for understanding. A question like this should just be then in like a 1 or 2 question Google survey or a quick quiz. It should be in a discussion form. The second is avoiding obvious prompts. I like to call these cupcake prompts. Prompts that everybody knows the answer to. It's not going to create any controversy. Example, laptops don't need to be guarded. They're perfectly safe being left out in an empty office. Do you agree or disagree? Well, obviously anybody with common sense is going to say laptops should not just be left out in an empty office, right? They have a lot of value. Most of the kids are going to say that they disagree with this, right? So a way to flip that, companies should instruct their workers to grab a laptop when they hear a fire alarm so that they can work elsewhere if they can't return to work due to the fire. Do you agree or disagree? Now this is going to create controversy. Some people are going to say yes, if it's safe to do so. They're getting paid well. They need to stay worker productivity. Some will draw a line on the other piece. It's going to lead to cross-disciplinary topics. So we want to avoid obvious prompts. You come up with an obvious prompt, it's going to stifle engagement and student interest, and it's not going to lead to that deep conversation, that class community, that the 4 C's, critical thinking, creativity that we're desiring. Another example and a common pitfall that, and I've done what I used to teach online, and it's been delivered to me as a student in online courses, are using discussion forums for complex questions. Here's an example of a complex question where we're putting in 3 different questions in one discussion prompt. There's a lot there. It's going to be overwhelming for the student. It's going to put you as a teacher in a difficult position. Well, what happens if a student only answers 1 question? What happens if they only answer 2 questions? This is like a research question that would be better suited in a research paper. The worst thing you can do in a discussion forum is requiring students to formally cite their sources, because then students spend more time making sure that they're properly using APA or MLA citation. They're spending less time critically thinking, being creative, opening themselves up to being vulnerable. And an example of how to switch this, Twitter recently announced employees can work from home. How do you predict this decision is going to impact Twitter in other Fortune 500 corporations? So we want to avoid complex questions in our discussion board prompt. Other pieces that I want to stress is prompts don't have to always be questions. Leverage all these different examples on the screen. And again, these will be in the packet that all of you will get for attending. But audio, put in podcasts, interviews, speeches, or maybe it's audio of you. And I'll show you some examples of this in a minute. Instead of writing out your discussion prompt in static text, maybe you record yourself talking and you have student hit play to hear the prompt. Just that subtle difference can engage students. Obviously, leveraging videos, role playing is one of my favorite things I used to do when I used to teach. Assigning thinking hats, where you assign different groups of students to respond to the prompt in different ways. If you're 30 years old, how would you respond here? 50 years old, 75 years old. If you lived in Africa, how would you respond? If you lived in Canada, how would you respond? Give somebody the factual hat, the creative thinking hat, the emotion hat. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Guest speakers, industry experts. You can bring in an industry expert. If you teach French, bring in somebody that's an expert in French and have them author a video that is prompting the students to engage in a prompt. Just those subtle changes can really stifle and create more interest in our classes. You can also have students help moderate your prompts. Why do you have to be the one to moderate? And you do a discussion forum a week, and you assign one of your students the ability to go in and moderate the forum on your behalf. And that's part of that student's assignment and expectations. And certainly right now, there's no shortage of examples, no matter what you teach, how to leverage current events in a way to raise awareness and to build that community in classrooms. Something else that also gets overlooked are images. Just putting an image in a class and connecting it with a call to action. Wow, you can generate emotion, controversy, and critical thought just by picking the right image. An example here, this one was just trending on Twitter. I didn't fact check this, by the way, so don't take me as the be all end all on this topic. I'm not 100% sure this is true, but this picture was trending on Twitter, and supposedly it's a picture of the Louisiana Tech University's football locker room, which just got a make lift that cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And on the left side is an example of a picture of a classroom at that university that obviously is underfunded. You can see the desks, the old wooden desks, that needs a paint job, there's holes in the ceiling. Imagine the controversy if you connected this, if it related to your discipline on, do you think this is fair, right, moral, unethical? You're going to get a lot of different viewpoints here. And that's what you want in your discussion forum. You want that controversy. That's what's going to keep the discussion going, and that's what's going to keep the students stimulated. Okay, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a 60-second break. And what I want you to do is to either go back on your paper, on your screen, or reflect again on that initial discussion prompt that I asked you to think about. I want you to reread it. What was your initial prompt? If you had to come up with a discussion prompt right now, what was it? And then I want you to cross-check it with the information on this screen. And I want you to ask yourself that initial prompt that you wrote down. My prompt will not generate a collection of similar responses, lead to obvious answers. Will it allow Google to answer the question? And then the opposite, my prompt will. And I want to give you another 60 seconds. And for those of you that are comfortable, let us know in the chat box an example of a change you could make to your prompt based on some of these tips and strategies that we just shared. Now I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to complete that. Reflect back on your original prompt and what changes can you make to it based on these tips, and let us know in the chat box. Don't be shy. You know, maybe I didn't give you enough time at the onset to come up with your prompt, but those of you that are comfortable or willing, what changes can you make to your prompt based on what you originally thought about and these tips and strategies that we just shared? While you're thinking about that, again, this will be in that guide that all of you will get, and it's a great checklist to have handy as you're lesson planning and you're coming up with your future discussion prompts. I would encourage you to print it out and keep this checklist next to your desk. And even if you're teaching synchronously and you're leading and facilitating a conversation with your students during class in a live format, these same strategies apply. The difference is you're doing it live versus offline or asynchronous. Thanks for sharing, Han. Great example of a change, Amanda. Thanks for reflecting on that and applying some of the things you learned. I love that. Remember, if you're not going to look forward or being excited to reading your students' responses, then your students probably aren't going to be excited to respond to that discussion prompt. Give you about 10 more seconds if anybody else wants to share, and then we're going to move on to the second piece, which is what should you think about doing while you're facilitating your discussion? Okay, so now we have our awesome discussion prompt, right? It's going to create controversy. It's going to include all the 4 C's. It's going to build cultural awareness. It's going to be aligned to learning objectives, all that good stuff. Now we go live with it. Now what do we do as a teacher? This is just as important as coming up with the good prompts. One, we need to be proactive. You're going to have students that aren't going to be engaged. Those students that aren't going to reply. Those students that consistently reply late, or those students that don't scratch the surface with their response. You need to be ready to go with how you're going to respond and coach up those students. That's where that feedback bank comes in handy. So you have that all ready to go. Equally important is you're going to publicly acknowledge those exemplary posts. Hey, Caitlin, great job on your post, and here's why. I appreciated you bringing in information from your personal life and connecting it to this topic. Please keep that up. Encourage a community of inquiry. Bring in current events. You can cross-reference people's attentions to other things. The second piece that you're going to need to do is monitor etiquette. Whether we teach face-to-face, online, or blended, you're always going to have students that challenge your expectations and showcase inappropriate digital citizenship. You need to be ready to go on how you're going to address those. We always want to make sure we address those in private, right? Again, leverage your feedback bank. And then participate. Research informs us that in the online learning environment, an online instructor or anybody that's weaving in discussion forums into their course should aim to respond to about 10 to 20% of the posts. That's the sweet spot. Just enough to let the students know you're there, just enough to redirect and extend conversations and extend critical thought, but not enough that you dominate. Because if students start to see you dominate, then they're going to rely on you as the instructor and not themselves. You want to extend the conversation with a mix of divergent and convergent questions. I'll have examples for you on the next screen and on your guide. You also want to redirect students to one another, and I'll show you an example of that here. So, clarification prompts. Hey, Ron, I'm not sure I understand what you meant by that. Can you try explaining this another way? You're re-engaging the student, right? Perspective prompts. Ronaldo took a different approach to his response. Lucy, go ahead and look at Ronaldo's approach and let me know why you agree or disagree with him. Now you're taking a student and you're forcing that student to go and learn a different perspective and engage with a different person in the class. That's your job as the host of the discussion forum. Hey, if you were 15 years older, would you still think this way? Challenge people's thought processes. And then the evidence and reason prompts. That's great you shared this, but what facts do you have to exist your claim? Can you go out and find some information for me and link to that in the discussion prompt? So that's your job as the host. Okay, now equally important to creating the good prompts, overseeing and facilitating the conversation is what are you going to do after that discussion closes? One of the strategies that I love to apply, and I encourage anybody that's doing discussion boards to do it, is what I call a wrap up. Discussion should not stop because the last student posted a reply. The biggest value a discussion that exists virtually has compared to face-to-face is it never dies. It never goes anywhere. When you have a great conversation in class with your students, when that bell ends, there's no record of it. It disappears. You can reflect on it and talk about it the next day, but there's no record of it. It cannot officially continue. In the virtual environment, that discussion's there. You can come back to it a week later, 2 weeks later. It's always there. Leverage that. A wrap up, when that discussion ends, as an instructor, when you wrap that discussion up and you bring it to a close, it showcases your presence and it strengthens your community of learning, and it reinforces to your students that, wow, these discussions we do as a class are pretty darn important. And it's a powerful way for you to make your learners aware of all the different things that came out in the discussion forum. Because the fact of the matter is, even if you have a great discussion, students aren't going to read all of the posts. They don't have the time to do that. And the wrap up will expose them to your summary of what that entire chat was. Remember, as a teacher, you control how that discussion stops and how it ends. So how do you do that? Well, when I used to teach online, I would analyze all of the responses and I would generate a summary connected to our learning outcomes. Inside that summary, I would highlight one or two students' posts. Hey, Katie mentioned X. I really appreciated this because of Y, because it reinforces that positive behavior I want everyone to model. And then I would provide a conceptual summary of, 25% of the students took stance X, 25% took Y, so forth and so on. I would include in that summary opportunities for those that are interested to extend their learning. Maybe a link to a current event study, or a research study, a link to a website, whatever it might be. And I would change up how I would wrap up those summaries. Sometimes I would type them as static text right back in the discussion form. Sometimes I'd summarize it as an announcement. Sometimes I'd do my wrap up as a podcast or an audio. Sometimes I would do it as a video recording. Keep students interested, keeps them stimulated. And I would save the wrap up and I would reuse it the next time I taught the course with a different set of students. Here's an example of a static wrap up that I used to use again in an adult course. I'm not going to read it to you, but again, it acknowledged a couple individual contributions. It provided an overall summary of what I read from my perspective. I provided my opinion, and then at the bottom, I linked out to something for them to extend their learning on. The wrap-ups are so positive. Okay, something else you can think about doing is as you get comfortable and confident building in more discussions in your class. If you have 5 discussions, 7 discussions, 10 discussions, at the end of the term, provide your students with the opportunity to give you feedback and rank them. So that way, you know, the next time you teach the course, which discussions to discard, which to improve, and which to keep. So get that feedback from students, especially if you start to play around with discussions that involve video or audio. And if you start to see that students like those better than static text, then maybe that's the direction you should go. So invite that feedback from your learners. All right, let me see on how we're doing on time here. Okay, good. Tips on other online discussion ideas. So depending on where you teach, I understand that maybe not everybody has access to a robust learning management system like Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, Google Classroom, or maybe some of you are looking for other ways to enhance your traditional online discussions. So the next 3 or 4 slides are examples of other ways that you can leverage discussion forums. And one is just using Padlet, right? It's a free tool. The entry of difficulty for you as the teacher and you as the student is low. The example on the screen here I showed is it's a video of me talking to the students, and in order to get the prompt, they have to watch the video. Then I give them the choice back on Padlet. They can respond back in text, they can respond back in audio, or they can respond back in video. And again, it's a free tool. It's very low entry. That's another way that you can leverage discussions, whether you teach face-to-face, blended, or online. The second way is something called Vialogs. I'm going to close out my screen here for a second. I'm going to give you a better example of that here. Let's see, right here. This is another way you can incorporate discussions into your classroom. A Vialog is basically takes the word dialogue and it takes video and it combines it into something called Vialog. And what you do is you find a video that you like. It could be one you authored yourself or one you find on the web, such as YouTube. You grab the URL and you upload it to this system. And then what you as the teacher have the ability to do is while the students are watching the video will periodically stop at benchmark times that you tell the video to do. And it'll prompt the students to either read a comment you make at that point in time during the video, or it'll prompt them with a question that you controlled, and then they can respond to that question on the Vialog. So this is another way that you can enhance your discussion forums outside of a traditional forum. Another example is the TED Ed platform. This is an awesome platform to leverage. It goes a little bit beyond just discussions. It allows you as a teacher to create an account, and there's 4 stages to the TED Ed platform. Stage 1 is the students watch a video. Stage 2, you can ask them some check for understanding questions. Stage 3 is where you can leverage in external resources to extend their learning outside the platform. And then stage 4 is a discussion forum where you would put in your engaging prompt and the students would react to that. That's called TED Ed, another way to leverage discussion forums with a little bit more bells and whistles. One of my favorite ways is through Voicethread. Voicethread is a powerful, this one probably has a premium cost to it, but it's a powerful way also to leverage discussions in a unique format. What will happen is students will respond in audio, and on the screen, it'll be pictures of their profile pictures that will populate all with audio responses. So instead of it being static text, it'll be icons of students' pictures where when you click on the icon, they have to respond back in audio. So this is an example where I have them read a letter. It's purposely vague, and they have to respond back in audio to the letter and the prompt that's included in the letter. So that's called Voicethread. So those are just 4 different examples of powerful discussion forums that exist outside of a traditional format. All right, I think I have 1 or 2 more done, then we'll wrap up, and I'll hang on and answer any questions that you have. So some closing tips. We already talked about thinking hats. We already talked about student moderators. I am a big believer in cultivating leadership skills in students. As the teacher, you can still facilitate, but why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone and have students participate and respond to the prompts, but also have them facilitate it, where they're starting to engage students in a mix of convergent and divergent questions. They're following up and poking and prodding students to expand more on their prompts. You can build a Q&A forum into your discussion board. It's a non-threatening place for students to go and ask their peers or you a question that has nothing to do about the class, a non-academic discussion forum. Another strategy, if you have large class sizes, is you can do split groups or student choice, where maybe you have 2 or 3 different prompts and students just have to respond to one, and you have those on different threads. Or students with last names A to M, you respond here, and to Z, you respond there. That's always good to do for large class sizes. Okay, closing tips. Remember, discussions can last throughout the entire semester. That's single-handedly the biggest advantage that online discussions have, the face-to-face. Leverage that. You're always going to have leaders in a discussion. Challenge them. We talked about research. Instructors should respond to about 10 to 20% of student posts. Don't dominate, but showcase your presence. Do not be afraid of controversy. That's what stimulates good conversation. Use it as a teachable moment. If the emotions get a little bit high, that's okay. Teach the students how to have that healthy discourse by applying appropriate digital citizenship skills. And then the last tip, don't deliver a discussion for the sake of discussion. When we do that, that's when it's going to lead to minimal student engagement, poor quality responses, students that don't post or don't reply. We want to make sure our discussion goes through all of those checklists that we talked about. So thank you for attending. What I'd like to do is give you another 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and kind of just share out in the chat, what's your power of 1? What was the 1 piece? When we started, I challenged you to kind of think of what your power to 1 was. What's 1 thing you learned? 1 thing that you can immediately apply to your class? 1 thing that challenged your prior perceptions of discussion forums? Or maybe 1 thing that you're going to reflect a little bit on? What's your power of 1, your takeaway from this? And if you're comfortable, I would absolutely love to hear what that is. And then after that, I'll hang on and answer any questions you have. Thanks for sharing, Han. Great, Julie. I'm glad that you saw that valuable. And I think there's going to be more examples of that in the guide that we shared with you. Glad to hear, Amanda. Yes, Keely, controversy equals engagement, 100%. Thanks, Christina. I love that. Hopefully you can incorporate some. I challenge you to think about how, specifically, how are you going to incorporate some of the tools? And by tools, maybe you're referring to that Vialog example or Padlet. That's awesome. Play around with it. Okay, as we wrap up, we're 15 minutes early. I'm welcome to hang on. I know once the recording is processed, our team will send out this recording to you. And I know that's probably in that same email. They'll also, if not already done so, attach our proximity learning guide to discussions. And that'll be a great resource for you that covers not just what I covered today, but it'll go into it in a lot more in depth. Does anybody have any other questions or any comments outside of that power of 1 prompt? Feel free to toss it in the chat box. Any other questions? Great example, Horace. Even if you can do that, those examples, and then you bring in the power of images to showcase that emotion and appeal to people's, hearts and their gut and their head, man, that'd be a powerful connection. One of the things I used to do when I taught is I'd always be on the lookout with my phone, examples of things that I came across in our community that I could take pictures of, that students would have a personal connection with, and then leverage those local images in my classes with students. Amanda had a good question. Scroll back up, I lost it. What do you do about those crickets? Yeah, there's no great solution to that, Amanda. You want to reach out to those students privately, let them know that you value them in class, that you've noticed based on their work that they have great insight to share, not just for you, but for the entire class to learn from. Let them know that the value of a learning community, whether you're doing it through discussions live, through a blog, or through a traditional discussion forum like we talked about today, is everyone can learn from everyone. And so let that student know that's not engaged, hey, I've noticed that you have great insight, great experiences to share with the rest of the class. Would you do me a favor and start to showcase that so that the rest of the students in the class can learn from you too? So that's a positive way of approaching that comes off more educational and not punitive. Also giving them more choice. Sometimes students aren't engaging in the prompt because they don't find it relevant to their learning. They don't find the value in them to participate. But by giving students more choice, you can respond in text, in video, in audio, or choice in the different prompts. That universal design for learning principles, you're opening yourself to hit more students. How do you allow students to take the lead in a discussion in a live class? Do I make them co-host? Great question, Han. If you teach for PLI, I'm not 100% sure on how those logistics work. And if we have the ability, to be honest, I think we do. So not speaking specifically to the PLI side, but speaking more in broader terms, before you let anybody take the lead, you want to make sure that you as the instructor are modeling what that lead looks like, setting that expectation and letting students know that you're going to be slowly allowing them to take the lead and facilitate more conversations. But before you do that, you want to go through with the students what those expectations are. You want to equip them with the ability to facilitate and to lead and support them along the process. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, Amanda. And again, there's no easy solution there. Your students are very shy. Again, by finding ways to connect the learning to them. So your students from Virgin Island, find ways to connect your discussion board prompts that are tied not just to your learning outcomes on your discipline, whether you teach math, science, social studies, English, but also to the culture there and current events that are taking place in St. Thomas or current events that are taking place in St. Croix. Tie in something that's meaningful to their community alongside what the outcome is that you want them to gain from it. See if that will work. And then if you do all that and you add in choice, you're probably going to start to get the outcome you want. Also by poking and prodding them privately. Yeah, similar to that, Christina, with the low participation. You just got to tinker things. I mean, as teachers, we all put on our teacher hats, right? And we try, we fail, we try again, and you'll get there. But the important thing is just to continue to try with different things, whether it's more variety or whether it's asking students. Sometimes we just need to ask them, hey, we're in a virtual course. One of the advantages of the virtual course is the ability for us to learn from one another, regardless of where we live. The geography walls are broken down, space is broken down. So ask them, what are you comfortable with? How can we get us as a class to engage more together? Sometimes it's helpful just to put them in the driver's seat as well. Horace, I see you have your hand raised. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat. No doubt. You are teachers and entertainers, Christina, and we appreciate you and everybody else on this call wearing all those different hats, and your tech supporters and your social emotional counselors at times, and your experts. You're wearing a lot of different hats, and we appreciate it, whether you work for PLI or not. Again, thank you so much for being here today. As I mentioned at the onset, your time today speaks volumes to your commitment as an educator. And we so thoroughly thank you. Now more than ever, we need high quality educators, as we all know. And we appreciate you and thank you for being here. Let's see here, as our team, check your email to receive your free downloadable guide. Awesome. The winner, oh, I didn't know you're doing this. Oh, yay. Congrats, Christina. You get the webinar gift card. Very cool. And you should be getting access to that guide as well. Anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. I think you have my email, but if you don't, I'll put that in the chat. And as you get the guide and you have more time to reflect on it, let us know, reach out, share on social media what you learned. Tag Proximity Learning on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Let us know what you learned from today or what you learned after you have time to reflect on it and apply it in live context during your classes. We're all in this together. So glad to hear that you found this valuable, Christina. Okay, with that being said, I think I'm going to sign off and stop the recording, but everybody have a wonderful Thursday and a restful and relaxing weekend.